So in ancient Near East culture, one of the things I really struggled with this passage, because when you see a shepherd in Idaho, or you hear about, like, have you guys ever been on a road in Idaho? You're driving along and then you see sheep. Has anybody ever had this experience before? And you know that you're not going very far, very fast. You're going to maybe be there for a while. And is the first thing that you see the shepherds, or the first thing that you see the sheep? Well, the first thing that you see is the sheep here in Idaho. What happens is you have the sheep and they're going forward, and then you see dogs at the back and they're barking or biting, and you see the shepherds generally on horses or the modern day four-wheeler, right? For the less romantic. And they're driving behind and they're pushing the sheep. So when Jesus says that I am the good shepherd, we might not have a good picture. You see, in the ancient Near East, the shepherd looked different. In World War I, there was a bunch of soldiers that didn't understand this as they tried to go collect a herd of sheep, and they were driving them, and they were pushing them and stealing them from a shepherd. But this shepherd was from the area around where Jesus was speaking. And he called to the sheep. And the sheep would no longer be driven because they were being called by the voice. And no matter what driving was happening behind them, they would peel and turn because they heard the voice of their shepherd. The ancient Near East, they said that when you had shepherds, you had somebody like David. David was a shepherd when he was a boy who became king. And one of the interesting things about the shepherds is that the shepherds didn't just have sheep. When I thought a lot of times we see these big sheep operations, it seems like they're, like, hey, we got a couple thousand sheep and we don't, we're just pushing them in front of me, and I have the dogs and they're barking and we're moving them. But that wasn't the way it was with the people and in the area of which Jesus taught. You see, the shepherd would know their sheep. David would have sung to his sheep, and he knew them by name. When a new one was born, the shepherd this is who he spent his time with, would name the sheep, and he would call them, and they would respond by their name as they would come to him. The new cartoon movie, David, it shows that there's a new baby born, and he calls him Tally. He's like, oh, Tally. And then Tally sees him and rejoices. That's not actually an improper picture, because there was actually a guy that they didn't experiment with this. He was a Scottish person. He was traveling, and he put on all of the shepherd's clothes. So he would smell like the shepherd, and he would look like the shepherd. And he would call to the sheep, and the sheep would not come because he did not know their name, and they did not know his voice. And this is the people who Jesus is talking to, this shepherd culture of the ancient Near East. So the story that we're going to start with today begins with the Pharisees and this man who was born blind in chapter 9. He was born blind, and we call the man born blind because he wasn't still blind. Otherwise, we'd just call him what? The blind guy, right? He was born blind, yet Jesus heals him. And then the Pharisees at the end, when this man who was born blind, he says, do you want to know who the Son of Man is? And he says, I do want to know. And Jesus says, the one who speaks to you am he. And then it says that the man goes and he what? Worships Jesus. He worships Jesus, and the Pharisees would have been around, and they would have been appalled, because worship is reserved for who? Reserved for God alone. We actually see there was angels in the Old Testament that when all of a sudden people fell down and they worshiped, they said, get up, I am not the one. I am not one to be worshiped. When Jesus has people fall at his feet and they worship, he says, you finally understand who I am. And so these Pharisees then, as Jesus says, I came so that who were blind could see, and those who may see have chosen to become blind. And the Pharisees said, are we blind? And then Jesus breaks in to this chapter that we're going to study today. Before we get there, let's look at a shepherd passage of Psalm 23. Remember what we just talked about, the shepherd. David, who was raised a shepherd. When Jesus talks about a shepherd, this is the way that God describes his relationship with the people. In the Old Testament, remember how there was a pillar of cloud and there was a pillar of fire? And where did it go? In front of the people. That was his voice, and the people would follow. David writes this, understanding shepherd culture. He says, the Lord, he is my shepherd. I shall not want. For the Lord, he makes me lie down in green pastures, and he leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I might walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Now, when it says the rod and the staff, these are pictures which a lot of people, if you're thinking about a shepherd as driving, are seeing as punishment. But that's not how shepherds worked. The rod and the staff would go before, so that what? He could take and battle the wolves or the predators, that those were protection instruments. So what we see is that God's protection, they comfort us. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You've anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and loving kindness will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. This is a man intimately acquainted with this shepherd lifestyle. The final thing that I want you guys to look in here, in addition to what we've already talked about, is this. Who is the good shepherd, and what should under shepherds look like? There are a lot of people, the Pharisees were one of them, that were sitting there and they were claiming to be shepherds of the people, right? So what happens is these Pharisees, they were wearing all the fancy garb. They were the teachers of the people, and they would tell the people, you need to follow this, you need to do that, you need to, And so Jesus says, as he's pointing out the good shepherd, he also is describing the characteristics that you should see in a shepherd. What does a shepherd look like? And so let's look at that. We realize that Jesus is going to be the good shepherd, but he also is going to appoint under shepherds for him. And what should they look like? Because guess what? There's a world full of people who claim to be this part. Let's look at what a good shepherd is. Just like finding, I don't know if you guys know this, but to find fake currency, they don't give you a bunch of fakes. You touch the real currency. And when you touch the real currency enough, you can identify fraud. And Jesus is saying, know the good shepherd. Let's look. He says this, truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter by the door into the fold of the sheep, but climbs up some other way, he is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the doorkeeper opens, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he puts forth all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. A stranger they simply will not follow, but will flee from him because they do not know the voice of strangers. Lord, I pray that as we look into this, that you would guide us with your voice, that you would help us to understand that when you are drawing this picture, what we are supposed to hear from it. That we would understand that when you claim that you are the good shepherd, Lord, that we would understand more what that means. We have a 2,000-year gap of history and also culture that we don't always get through. And so, Lord, I pray that you would teach us. Lord, I pray that you would forgive the sins of the speaker, for you know that there are many, but God, your word is so good. And Jesus, you are worthy of it all. You are worthy of all the praise and all the glory. I pray that you would just be lifted up today and make yourself known. In Jesus' name, amen. And so the first thing that we see, our observation number one, is a shepherd, thief, or a robber. We're going to notice that there's some things in here. He's talking to the Pharisees in this passage. He says these Pharisees, they're claiming to be the shepherds of the people. And then he first mentions to them, he says, truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter by the door into the fold of the sheep, but climbs up some other way, he is a thief and a robber. He who doesn't enter by the door. Jesus will later clarify that he is indeed the door, that the way into the sheepfold is through an interaction and a relationship with him. That without a relationship with Christ, no person should be a shepherd. That what they will want, if they are entering from another way, is what? As you're looking at this, that you have people who come through the door. Jesus, that later on, he says, I am the door. We're going to expand on what that means later. But he says, the people who don't come in from the door, Jesus is saying, guess what? You guys are in the population here. And there are people amongst you who are trying to be shepherds that have no business being shepherds because they came in not from the door. They didn't come in through the door, which is that relationship with Jesus Christ. They came in from some other way. And that some other way is not through a relationship with Christ, but it is through ambition. It is through wanting status, wanting prevalence, wanting domineering over people's lives. That all of a sudden they wanted to get a robber and a thief. What do? They take from people. And the shepherd gives to people. That the thief is concerned, the robber is concerned with what I can gain from those people who are around me. Padding my status. Making me feel good. Making me look good. Maybe they're in it for financial reasons. I was doing a funeral. And it was interesting, the funeral leader, and the guy's a nice guy, and he was curious about how church works here. He'd never really been inside of an evangelical church or doesn't really know how it works. And so one of his questions, he was like, so you're a pastor. Has it been good for you financially? Loaded. No, we are like, but we see this, that there's one way to being somebody who should shepherd. And Jesus says, I am the door. If you're not coming through me, there might be other people who want to get into that position. But if they're not coming into a relationship and a calling from Jesus to do that, then they are false shepherds and taking people the wrong direction. And so we look at this and we say, hey, let's just take a look. I'm not going to call people out by name, but let's look at the world and look at who people are using as their shepherds. Do they want for them or do they want from them? It's a very good way to see a good shepherd. Is he a person that wants for this people, or does he want to take from his people or her people? If all of a sudden you are needed so that they can complete their kingdom come. They haven't come in through the door, but some other way. And Jesus is warning as the Pharisees are standing amongst the people. Now think about this picture as the Pharisees are standing amongst the people, and some people believe in Jesus, but they also have these authorities who are here and they're just like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And Jesus starts with, there are people who are going to try to be shepherds. The true shepherd comes in through the door. That's the first thing. And one of the things that they realize is that they're not afraid to walk in through the door because they know the door. Because that is Jesus. Later on he says, I am the door. When shepherds back in that ancient Near East time, they'd have these walls of rocks around the sheep, and then what would happen is they would hire somebody to be what? The door. they would lay at the entrance, and that's what kept the sheep in. And then when the good shepherd would come in, he would come in and he would say, I need to go and take out my sheep. And they would say, of course you can. Why? Because I know you. You are the shepherd. I just accidentally hit on something. Remember, Jesus says there are some people who are going to say, look at all I did in your name. And he will say, depart from me, for I never what? I never knew you. You see, those who are good shepherds would know and are not afraid to enter through the door. The sheep, they also hear his voice. This is a beautiful thing, that those who hear his voice, the sheep, they know the shepherd. I was talking about how my wife and I remember my friend Matt Kessy. Matt is a youth pastor in Kennewick, Washington, where we grew up. You know, I had friends that started, all over the board, but Matt was one of those. He was a pastor when he was a freshman in high school. He told me, I am called to be a pastor. And he made decisions throughout his life that was what he was called to be. And I met Matt and his wife. After Hallie and I met, we went out to dinner and spent time with them. Surprisingly enough, he's a youth pastor in Kennewick. And they asked us to share the story about how we met. And as we talked about how God had brought Hallie and I together, his wife stopped and she says, that sounds like my God. The story that you're telling is the Jesus that I know. You see, the sheep, they hear his voice, they sit there and they taste him and they say, you know what? This is my God. I know how he operates. And so the sheep, they hear his voice, that they are hearing his voice, that they know the shepherd. One of the things that I think about as far as hearing his voice, we can know that this is one important thing as followers of Christ. We're able to know his voice. The other day I was sitting out in my lawn and I saw my neighbor and he was sitting out on the porch and I knew that the Lord was calling me to go talk to him. We didn't have a salvation experience, but I was like, the Lord was saying, go and talk to Joe. Go and check on Joe. And he was just lost in thought, and I just checked in on him. But I just knew that it was like, hold on, this is a point of rebellion in my life. What if he thinks I'm just interrupting his life? What if he does this? What if he does that? I've known that God has correlated those conversations, and most of the time it's calling me to things that I don't want to do. But how can we do this? We can learn by listening. By saying, Lord, I know that you are calling me to do things in this world that I don't always see. Please help me listen. The other thing that we see in this, that sheep hear because they listen. The other thing, it says that he calls them by name. That the good shepherd, that the good shepherd, he calls them by name. The picture here is that the Pharisees, they want repute and they want acclaim from what? From the masses. They didn't know them. They didn't know them by name. They wanted acclaim from people that were pawns in their game. I need the acclaim of many. I need the applause of many, but I do not know their name. On the other hand, we look at Jesus. In Isaiah 49, 14 through 16, there's this claim, and if you want to replace Zion with just the people say, the Lord has forsaken me. Has anybody ever felt this place? The Lord has forsaken me, and the Lord has forgotten me. Isaiah, this prophet that's telling us about the Messiah, this is the response. Can a woman forget her nursing child and have no compassion on the son of her womb? Even if they may forget, I will not forget you. Behold, I have inscribed you on the palm of my hands. The problems that you got, your walls, they're continually before me. This is a picture that you see that the very names that were inscribed on his hands are the names of those people that he goes and gets pierced for. He has written your name on his hands. He knows, according to when Jesus talks about this, he's seen every single hair on your head and knows every single second of your life, and he has put your name on his hands. He calls you by name. It is not a shepherd who sits there and says, hey, whatever random sheep might be there. And those of you who have come to know Jesus understood it wasn't a call to other people. It wasn't a call to the masses. Jesus has called me by name. He has shown me that I need, and he is that door. That he's not looking for acclaim, that Jesus isn't sitting there and saying, hey, Jason, I need another follower so that way I can, get my likes up. I'm not there. No. Jesus is saying, I don't need from you. I am for you. And I'm going to provide a way for you. And so the other thing shows us this is that he leads them out. And this is a characteristic both that we see with Jesus and we're going to see with any good shepherd, is that he leads them out. The good shepherd is not calling us to a place he hasn't been. He's not calling us to walk into a place that he's unsuccessful. One of my favorite passages in the Bible is the temptation of Jesus. And you say, why is that one of my most favorite passages? That's like one of the bad parts. He pursued and went to be tempted, so that when I am tempted, Hebrews says that he was tempted in all things, yet he without sin, so that we might have a shepherd who what? Walked before us. He's not behind us with a whip. He is walking before us as one who calls our name. And he says, follow me. Follow me. I will lead you. And where I am going, or where you are going, I've already been. But you with much failure, right? But Jesus with much success. You're not talking to a Lord who sits there and says high above, hey, you need to get better, Alex. He says, follow me, Alex. He says, follow me, Dave. He says, follow me, Ella. I've already been where you're going. I've walked through this life, through peril, through danger, through persecution. I've already been where you're going. And I know your name. Come and follow. He is not a shepherd who drives. He is a shepherd who leads. Isn't that a beautiful picture? Of all of a sudden you see this picture and Jesus is saying, this is the difference between what the Pharisees are doing and what I'm doing. I'm calling you to something completely different. The Pharisees would be weighing people down with things and not lifting a finger to help them. Here's what you must do now, John. Here's what you must do now, Ben. Here's additional thing that you must do. Here's an additional thing that you must do. And then when you do all of these things, then I think you'll probably be good enough to maybe, shine my shoes. No. He's saying, come and follow. I know your name and I know where you're going. I've been there. Follow me, Jesse. Imagine the difference in the perspective to the people. He calls them by name. He leads them out. By the way, this is something that should be happening not just by what Jesus does when he says, I'm calling them out, but we see this in every good shepherd. The Apostle Paul, he claims this as he says in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 1. He says, be imitators of me, just as I also am of Christ. Why? Paul's saying, I'm going to go and follow Jesus. If you guys follow me, you're going to be on the right path. That is a terrifying statement to make, isn't it? Imagine if you had to look at your children and say, hey, you want to follow Jesus? Just follow your mom and dad. We got this. Like, But this is what a good shepherd should do. They should be able to say, I'm following Jesus. I'm listening to his voice. He's not driving me. I follow him because I know his voice and he has called me. Where he leads, I go. And he leads them out. And then all of a sudden it says in verse 6, continue on with the passage. Verse 6, this figure of speech, when all of a sudden they heard this, Jesus spoke to them, but they did not understand the things which he had been saying. They heard, but they couldn't hear. Just like they could see, but they were blind. They couldn't understand what he'd been saying, so Jesus, I'm going to break this down for you. Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, I'm that door of the sheep. All who came before me, the ones that are around you, they are all thieves and robbers, but the sheep didn't hear them. I'm the door. If anyone enters through me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes in to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they might have life and have it abundantly. I'm a good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not the owner of the sheep, or is not the owner of the sheep, he sees the wolf coming and he leaves the sheep and he flees. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he's a hired hand and he's not really concerned about the sheep. I'm a good shepherd and I know my own, and my own know me. Even as the Father knows me and I know the Father, I lay my life down for the sheep. I have other sheep which are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will hear my voice, and they will become one flock with one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, that I lay down my life so that I may take it again. No one has taken it away from me, but I lay it down on my own initiative. I have the authority to lay it down, and I have the authority to take it up again. This commandment I received from my Father. A division occurred among the Jews because of these words. Many of them were saying, he has a demon, he's insane, why would you listen to him? And others were saying, these are not the sayings of one demon possessed. A demon cannot open the eyes of the blind, can he? And so we see Jesus as he tries to clarify with people who say, I don't really understand. And so how do we identify the true shepherd? The first thing that we see is that Jesus, he says to them, okay, if you don't understand what a good shepherd looks like, I'm going to break it down to you. Here's how to identify a true shepherd. He is the door. The first thing Jesus says is, he says, I am the door. Let's go back to Genesis. Genesis 6:16, it says this, you shall make a window for the ark and finish it to a cubit. The ark. At this particular time, what's going to happen to the world? The whole world is going to be destroyed. It's going to be in judgment. Why? But whoever enters the ark will be saved. And they're going to have little windows so that way they can breathe, and so you don't have to smell everything as bad. That's probably good. And then it says, and you shall set what? The door of the ark on its side of it. And you shall make it with lower, second, and third decks. But there is how many entry places? There is one door. This is what Jesus is pointing to when he says, I am the door. Anyone who enters through me will be safe. He's making a picture of what? There is one entryway and one path to salvation, and it is open to all people, but it is through the person of Jesus Christ. And he's saying, I am the door. And if they won't come in through me and they want to be this person of influence, they want to be, then what are they? They're thieves and they're robbers. They want from you, they don't want for you. If you look at the next passage, it talked about this. It says in 7:16, I don't even think I put it on there. It says, then all who entered, male and female, and all flesh entered as God commanded him, and who is the one who could shut the door? And the Lord was the one who closed it behind him. Jesus is saying, I am the door. And what does he talk about? He says, there is a day that judgment will come with. There's no longer a path to salvation. But right now, sweetheart, right now there is a path to salvation through the door. Jesus is saying, I am the door. Come in through me. And then the next part that we see after he says that I am the door is, so this Old Testament passage, then he talks about the contrast of the true shepherd and the false shepherd. So he says, I am the door. And then he says, all who came before me, what are they? They're thieves and the robbers. But the sheep didn't hear from them. Why? Or did not hear them because they only want things from them once again. The thieves, they come in, and if you look at thieves and robbers, what do they want to do? They want to take from you and steal from you. But the door is Jesus here to give life and to give it abundantly. that those who are false shepherds aim to take and generate from the people rather than to give for the people, rather than to serve the people. So the next thing that we see is that we see Jesus, he's not just offering life. He uses a word right here. It says, I am the door. If anyone who enters through it, he will be saved and will go. And if you look at verse 9, it says, he will go in and out and find pasture. Do you know what that means? When it says they will go in and out and find pasture, it's an Old Testament reference that's saying this is how life is supposed to work, that you will not be chained because of what I am doing. You will be free because of what I'm doing, and you will be able to walk in and go out and have pasture and have life abundant that you were actually meant for. That you were meant for life abundant, that you were meant for life going in and out, but we have satisfied ourselves and we bought some lie of, well, if I start to follow Jesus, I'm more chained. Has anybody ever heard that or believed that? Besides me? In Galatians chapter 5, 16 through 26 is a passage I've been going over with some men who are going to become great followers of Jesus. Let's look at it. It says, I say to you, walk by the Spirit, and you will not carry out the desire of the flesh. For the flesh, it sets its desire against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. For these are in the opposition to one another, so that you may not do the things that you please. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. Do you know what under the law is? Trying to keep all the rules. But if you are led by the Spirit, you're no longer just trying to keep the rules, right? Instead, you are going towards what God has intended you for. Now, the deeds of the flesh that God's trying to keep you, that the deeds of the flesh, which your body, this fleshly thing wants, but you are embarrassed of formerly. Do you guys ever have that? Something that you want, you think it's going to be good for you, and then after you do it, you're like, I'm embarrassed. I hope nobody noticed that. The deeds of the flesh are evident. Immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmities, strife, jealousy, outbursts of anger, disputes, dissensions, and factions, envying, drunkenness, carousing, and things like these, of which I forewarn you, just as I have forewarned you, that those who practice such things will not enter the kingdom of God. By the way, is there things in that list which you're like, I hope people know me as? My flesh might be burning for it, but I don't want anybody to know it. That's the prison of sin. You sit there and say, having a relationship with Jesus means I get to do what I want. Is that the things that you want? Or is that a prison? It's a prison. It's slavery. And then the other option is what? That we sit there and say, oh, okay, I'm going to live my life full of what? Not doing those things. You ever tried not doing those things? I was talking to some guys about golfing this last week, and they're like, I'm not going to cuss this week golfing. Good luck on that one, guys. Why? Because you can't fill your life of things you're not going to do. You are not meant to be an empty vessel. You are meant for life more abundant. You are not meant to be just keeping a law. You are meant to be pursuing the Spirit, which is what? The fruit of the Spirit is love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against those things there is no law. If all of a sudden we're going out golfing and saying, I want to pursue joy in this experience and faithfulness and peace when I go and hang out with other people, this is what I want them to taste. I am going to pursue that in my life. I don't have room for those other words. I don't have room for those things on my screen that sometimes show up when my flesh is wanting to eat. Instead, I say, no, I am so full, I don't have room for others. That Jesus is offering us not a life of emptiness, but a life of absolute fullness. if you are so full of love and joy and peace and patience and goodness and faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, if you are full of those things, you don't have room in your life for something else. And that's what Jesus is saying. I'm calling you to come in through the door and have life. What type of life? A life that looks like this. A life when people taste your life, it ends up tasting like Jesus' character. The Spirit that is within you, if you have accepted Jesus Christ, is crying out to become like this. But we still live in a body of flesh that has its hungers. And so what do we have? We have a consistent battle in our lives. And a lot of us have tried to do what? We've tried to follow Jesus by taking and saying, I'm just going to live empty. That is not what Jesus has called us for. He wants you to live a life of abundance, a life of fullness, a life where you heard and hear the voice of the shepherd, and you will realize that he is walking before you and saying, guess what? Jesus didn't live an empty life. He lived a full one of love and joy and gentleness and kindness. The picture that we have there, John's actually out of the room, but John, I use him as the picture that I have of gentleness. John will wrestle with my son Silas. And if John wanted to, he could kill my son Silas. But Silas wins sometimes. Because that big man, he comes and he takes his power under control for the blessing and benefit of other people. And I see Jesus in him when he does that. For the benefit of my son, this strong man shows gentleness. And that's the thing we're called to be in this world, men. You're called to take that strength of which you have, that you could use it to hurt somebody and use it to protect and cover somebody, because that is the Jesus who you serve. That is the voice of the one who's calling out to you. Who's calling out and saying, Jeremy, let's go. I've already been where you're going. And I want you to use the strength that I have given you to reflect my character in the world that so desperately needs it. If we're full of that, do we have room for the place of the flesh? No. Jesus is calling us to a life of abundance, a life where we're following that good shepherd. Go back to observation number 2. I have no idea where I'm at in my notes. How can we tell of the good shepherd? How can you tell? For a good shepherd, it says that we see this. He says, I am the good shepherd, and I know my own. Verse 11. I'm a good shepherd, and the good shepherd, he lays down his life for the sheep. How can you tell that he is the good shepherd? You can tell that he is a good shepherd because instead of like verse 10 and 11 where he's trying to take from people, he's trying to provide the people with a place for life. I am going to lay down my life that you have, or the life that I have, because you're in bondage of that flesh. You're a slave to things of which you do not like or love and that you hate. And guess what? You're not intended for that life. You're intended for a life of abundance. So guess what? I'm going to lay down my life for the sheep. We see the shepherds in the Old Testament. We see David, he killed a bear and he killed a lion. Why? Because those were his sheep. They weren't just the sheep. They were his sheep. Think about that. Think about the difference when you know and call the sheep by name. When there's a threat, it's not a question. It's not a question, should I get involved? Should I get in the middle? Jesus sits there and he says, these are my sheep. I would lay down my life for them. But it's not just that he lays down his life for the sheep. You know what? A lot of people can die for something. But not a lot of people, I'd say none people, can take their life back up. Jesus says, you will know that I am the good shepherd because I will lay my life down for the sheep, because I have the authority to lay it down and to take it back up. And if you want to know how you can know that I am the good shepherd, he tells the people, It's not just because I will lay down my life for the sheep and because I care for the sheep and because I am for the sheep, not needing from the sheep. I am for the sheep, but if you want to know, I will pay the price for the sheep. I will lay down my life. And then you're like, well, that's a great sacrifice. It is, but that's not the whole story. And then I will take it back up again as I conquer death and raise from the grave, showing you, guess what? You do not no longer need to fear death because I am the good shepherd. I have walked before you into the place that you fear the most, and I have conquered it. And your future is with me because you are my sheep if you hear my voice and you will follow me. And then he then says, this passage he talks about, he said, then he gets into this one flock thing. He says, there are people, he says there is one flock. Oh, where are we at here? Okay. Oh, I have other sheep, which are not of this fold. I must bring them also that they may hear my voice, and they will become one flock with one shepherd. One of the things that you have to understand is that people don't get saved by coming to Caribou Bible Church. Crazy, Jeremy, I know. I thought it's the only way. Turns out Caribou Bible Church is not the door. But we talk about the door. It is a personal relationship with Jesus. In this particular case, he's talking to these Jewish people and trying to introduce them to the fact that, you know what? I went to Samaria, and there are people who are Samaritans who you'd look down on as dogs. They're my sheep. Why? Not because they've changed who they are, not because they go to the right church, but because they came in through the door. That there is one shepherd, and there is one flock. And there might be other people. There's a church right now that is meeting today in other places of the world, some places in secret, that we don't know. But they have the same shepherd. So they're from the same flock. That whoever believes in him shall not perish. That he is the door for the whoever. What if all of a sudden they were born of compromising circumstances? What if their parents weren't great parents? Whoever. What if they were people who have done bad deeds in the past? Whoever. Whoever will come in through the door and say, Jesus, I realize that I'm not going to make it on my own. I need to walk through the door. I need your gift that's laid down for me. And whoever is not just Jewish people. And it's not just Americans. And it's not just Republicans or not just Democrats. And it's not just, it's the whoever will trust in him. Will say, you know what? There's a lot of other things I've tried, but I'm not meant for that, the life that I've been trying to live. I've not been meant for things I'm not going to do. Does anybody ever live the life that, I'm not going to do this anymore? How successful were you? Not very. I'm not going to do this anymore. And I fill my life full of what I'm not going to do. It's not the life more abundant. You were meant to go in and go out and find pasture, following the good shepherd who knows your name and calls you with his voice. He's not driving you. He's saying, John, come follow me. Audrey, let's go. Not a whip behind you, but a voice in front of you who's already seen the things. So what? The first thing is that I think in the so what today is, what does godly shepherding look like? We need to look at Jesus. Now, I kind of was struggling with this passage because a lot of times it was talking to pastors, the things that I was researching and studying. And so I was challenged with some of it, but I think that it goes with both. What does good shepherding look like? First of all, he knows our name. You are called to know the name of your shepherd, but you are also called to shepherd other people, being disciples who make disciples. When we have, like if all of a sudden you hear about mega churches and they have 10,000 people in the crowd, the person that's speaking sometimes is not the shepherd of those people. Because the shepherd knows their name. It's someone probably in their small group or somebody in their circle, the person who calls and encourages them. That's the shepherd. And you're not called to only be a disciple, you're also called to be a multiplicative disciple and to be a shepherd of others. How do you do that? You get to know somebody's name. The good shepherd, first of all, Jesus, he knows your name. How do you know that he knows your name? Because he's inscribed it on the palm of his hands. The second thing that we see with the good shepherd is he walks what? Not behind us. Not Captain Courage. Go out there and get him, guys. Right? He walks before us. Paul writes, follow me as I follow Christ. A good shepherd should not be behind, but in front of the people. And that's what Jesus shows us. His desire is for us, not from us. That if you think about that, why is a good shepherd for the sheep? Because they're his sheep. He wants them to what? Multiply. Why? Then he has more sheep that he can love and he knows by name. So he wants all of a sudden, Jesse, I want you to multiply. Why? Because I want you to start shepherding other sheep with me that I can know and name and love. Ooh. But he also knows my name. And he knows every hair on my head. He's inscribed my name on his hands. And he walks before us. Number three, he desires. Number 4, he desires abundant life for us. That he is not trying to sit there and say, hey, here's all the things that Nancy can't do. Right? Isn't that what a lot of people approach Christianity like, or religion in general? Hey, I'm going to become a Christian. Here's all the things that I can't do. No. He is meant for you to live a life of abundance. That means that some things are going to get cut out of your life because they're not things that are doing anything but destroying. When all of a sudden I have outbursts of anger, am I building or am I destroying? My flesh feels really good for a moment, and then I need to apologize to everybody around because I'm remorseful. Is that the life more abundant I'm called to? Or a life full of joy and patience and love? Do I want my children to, when all of a sudden they have something go wrong? I had a situation with Silas yesterday. And when he did something wrong, what do I want? I want him to run towards me, not from me. That's what a good shepherd would do. So he desires abundant life for us. And so when Jesus does put things and says, this one's out of bounds, it's not because Jesus is trying to eliminate or ruin our lives. It's because you are meant for more than just the feeding of your flesh. The E we have, he is concerned for the sheep. That all of a sudden when we have passages, can anybody think about a passage where Jesus says, I care about the sheep? Like, I don't know, the lost sheep. Has anybody ever been the lost sheep? And it says that he loves the sheep. And why? It says that he leaves the 99 to seek out the one. Is that shepherding what you think of in southeastern Idaho in 2026? Got most of them. Hopefully that one turns up. Not when you've named them. Not when that's your little Dean. Not when that's your Jeanette. That's not when that's your Dennis and you're like, no, this is my sheep and I lost one. If you lose one of your kids, you're just like, well, I got 3 more. Turn up. No. I go, these ones are okay. I got to go and find my lost one because I know their name. And then finally, F, he lays down his life for the sheep. If you want to know what a good shepherd looks like, you know his voice. He calls you out. He's calling you to more abundance. Does he care for me? He lays down his life for me, for the one that's inscribed on his palms. And so then the other point of application is, if you have not, Do you see now the character that Jesus says when he says, I am the good shepherd? This is what he calls for you. If you have not entered into a relationship with Jesus, today is a day he is inviting you in. He is not calling you to heaviness. He is calling you to be free of the garbage and into the grace and abundance, the going in and the going out and finding pasture of which you were intended for. That is the life you were meant for. That is the life of more abundance. If you have not accepted the Lord Jesus Christ, and it might be because you have a mountain of things that you say, I got to get this right before I have Jesus. Jesus paid for the death of all things. It says in his word that it says he became sin and took on the very sin who knew no sin, who didn't have any, so that you might get exchanged your sin for the righteousness of God. That's what the good shepherd does. Is he lays down his life so the sheep who don't deserve it can inherit eternal life. For whoever will come in through the door to the place you are meant to be, to go in and go out and find pasture. And so if you have not started a relationship with Jesus, he doesn't come in uninvited. When he says, I stand at the door and knock, anyone who hears my what? Anyone who hears my voice and asks me to enter in, I will come in and be with him and he with me. Jesus doesn't come in uninvited. And if you need to make that decision today, I encourage you to. It would be as simple as, Jesus, I realize that I have fallen short. Will you please come into my life? I realize that you lived a life that I couldn't live, and you died a death that I deserved, that I might have life. Lord, I pray that you'd come into my heart. Lord, I do thank you for these people. And I pray that if anybody is in that place of wanting to ask you to come to know them, that they would not hesitate, that they would realize that your heart is for them and that you are the good shepherd. That maybe we've had people in our lives that have been tried to be shepherding over us that haven't always been good, but that you are good. That you want to lead us and that you want to go in. You want us to go in and go out and find pasture. That you want us to have a life that's more abundant. God, I pray so much that they would know your heart and know your love for them and realize that the Pharisees at this point would have been bristling because they wanted from people and you were for these people. God, I pray that they would come in and find refuge in the shadow of your wings, that they would come in and find peace. Lord, I pray for those of us that have been trying to live life on empty, that we would forgo that and live life on the full. God, I thank you so much for this day, and I thank you for these people, and I thank you for your mighty word. In Jesus' name, amen.